Josh, thanks again for being here. So I've been following you for some time, obviously, and I get the concept of DoNotPay, right? Obviously, no one likes paying parking tickets, but you decided to beat bureaucracy at its own game. You decided to prioritize purpose in the business model, always putting the desire to help customers protect their rights above anything else. So I want to start with a little more about yourself and how DoNotPay got started. What's the story? How did you get to this?
So DoNotPay is the world's first robot lawyer, and it started with getting people out of their parking tickets. Six years ago, I was a terrible driver and got all these expensive tickets, and I was writing the same letter over and over again to get myself and my friends out of their tickets. And as a software engineer, I thought this could so easily be automated. Why do you have to pay a lawyer 50% of the cost of the ticket or hundreds of dollars an hour just to get access to your legal rights? Yeah. So I did it for fun, and it was so popular that I thought there's more to this idea than just a few parking fines.
That's amazing. Yeah. And DoNotPay ended up growing into a whole suite of products, though, that are fighting bureaucracy and a lot of these antiquated government systems. I'm curious, how do you decide what areas of bureaucracy you want to tackle next, but also what are some of the most popular services that DoNotPay offers?
So we now operate in over 200 areas of consumer law. Everything from getting bank fees back to cancelling subscriptions to landlord-tenant disputes. And really, the legal system is pay to play. And so we target areas where more than 50 million people aren't getting access to their legal rights. And oftentimes there are these mass market consumer disputes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the various products that you have right now that are definitely, consumer favorites?
My favorite product is one that allows you to sue robocallers. We all get robocalls, but there's this great federal law that can get you up to 1.5K per robocall.
I know a lot of people that would love that. I changed my phone number at one point, actually, because I was getting so many robocalls. This year, in 2021, we had a very interesting moment, right, with the Robinhood situation, where there was GameStop phenomena happened, and Robinhood temporarily stopped the trading of GameStop stock, and you ended up with an opportunity at DoNotPay, right?
So Robinhood prevented people from buying GameStop, and as a result of that, the stock crashed, and people were also prevented from getting in when it was a low price.
Right.
And so whenever one of these great injustices happen, the lawyers get involved, and there's a 6-year class action, and then maybe after 6 years, someone gets like a 50-cent check in the mail. And that's really not a good outcome for the consumer. So what we said at DoNotPay is you can sue Robinhood in small claims court. You can report Robinhood to the SEC. And also we did one of our own class actions with a law firm in New York.
You made it really easy for people to be able to do that. I think that's the key part of this. But can you walk me through your decision making when something like that totally outside of your control happens? I imagine you have a massive backlog of bureaucratic systems that DoNotPay is wanting to go after.
Yeah.
How do you decide to go after something in the moment? Like, how do you pivot the team to be able to go after that?
So we spent the past few years building an army of robots where we can record a workflow, and for one person, and then for the next million people, the robots will do it. And this can be things like clicking on government websites, sending faxes, sending letters, and we even have a robot that will phone up a phone tree and dial the correct numbers, for example, to get a DMV appointment in California.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so in my head, I pictured that there was you had separated your engineering team into two teams, right?
Yeah.
There's the team that's constantly working on, the same stream of products and whatever the backlog is, but there was a whole other team that was intentionally going after things in the moment, right? Because there's always momentary items that need galvanizing of a lot of people. So, but it's not that. It's literally robots that you've created to go and do this automatically?
So we pick the use cases ourselves. It's a small team of 12 people. The average age is maybe 24.
Wow.
All these type of people that browse Reddit late at night looking for ways to save money. So we're just trying to scale ourselves.
I like that. So I want to talk about one of my favorite topics right now, which is the San Francisco exodus. Everyone is seemingly leaving California, especially those in tech and especially those in Silicon Valley. And a lot of people are heading to Texas or the Midwest.
Yeah.
And you, I saw on Twitter, talked about taking DoNotPay to Florida. What's there for DoNotPay and why was that decision made?
Over the past few years, San Francisco has become increasingly anti-innovation, even more so than other cities in California. So for example, they have this tax, it's called the gross receipts tax. And what it is 0.5% of revenue, not even of profit.
Wow.
So DoNotPay does a lot of these things where we're saving the consumer time by paying their DMV registration fee, and then the consumer reimburses us. Okay. But California say that's revenue. Even though DoNotPay doesn't make any money, you have to give us 0.5%.
Super interesting. It's been interesting seeing at least people going to Florida, but yeah. It's the question that's remained in my mind, and something I want to ask you is, why even have an office-based model anymore? Is it even useful, or because it seems like everyone's remote now?
Yeah.
So for your team of 12, is it really important to have an office and be somewhere centrally located for everyone, or is remote the next move for you all?
Going back to your earlier point, I think we're a product-driven, like, magic company, and so we need to have that in-person collaboration to come up with these ideas. Okay. But certainly, if it's a much more boring company, then there's no need to be sitting in an office.
Yeah, that makes sense. So ultimately, you started your company out of a need and a desire to help other people fight bureaucracy and unfair punishments, and you keep finding new ways to approach it, which I love. And that's really what I want to get into today, how we prioritize purpose and use that to create strong business concepts again and again. Was there a moment, some event or success or mentor that made you go, you know what, this is the business I want to build. Let's make this a company.
Going back to the first days of DoNotPay, on day 1 we had 10 cases, and on day 2 we had 30,000 cases, parking tickets.
Wow.
Because it went viral on Reddit, and it turns out that everyone hates parking tickets globally.
Right.
And the reason it went viral is one of our users was a blogger at the Huffington Post, and usually these blog posts get maybe 500 views, but this one happened to go viral. And that's what made me realize that this is an issue that we all deal with, but no one yet has solved it.
When you're a founder, you know more than anyone else how important it is to have a really strong team that's creative, that thinks outside the box, and frankly achieves results. How important is it to you to hire people who are passionate about what you're building?
I think it's very important because extrinsically motivated people might not have those motivations during the journey. There were times at DoNotPay where it was very hard and we had to work for years to get it to be a success. And the reason what kept me motivated was that I'm the type of person to wait on hold for 4 hours for a $10 refund. And so for me, it's not even about building a company, it's just about the mission of helping people fight back. I hate authority and I hate large corporations, and I want to scale that to everyone.
And that same sentiment runs true across your entire team and everyone that works there, all the engineers, the product people?
Definitely. Most of the products come from people having these problems in their lives.
What would your advice be for young entrepreneurs trying to make teams and build purposeful companies, really?
The biggest thing is that we're in an amazing time in the world where you can build something with no one else's permission. Oftentimes these mission-driven companies, they go against the status quo, but because of the power of software, you can create something overnight and it can have a big impact. So my biggest advice would be just get started and build whatever it takes.
I like that. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk more about your life circumstances that really motivated you to take the unique path into startup culture. You grew up in some very interesting circumstances. Your father was publicly, had a tumultuous relationship with the Russian government. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, so I'll let you give the context you want to give on whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But what I really want to know is, were you affected at all, or how were you affected by your father's political activism growing up?
Yeah, my father is a human rights activist, and he goes against the Russian mafia. Yeah. And the main way that it has affected me is it's made me fearless. I think there are all sorts of problems you can have in life, entrepreneurial challenges or other problems. But when the mafia is after your family, it puts everything in perspective. Yeah. And so DoNotPay is a very anti-lawyer, anti-government company, and we've got some threatening letters and things like that. But I don't really care. I've seen a lot worse.
That's great. So, would you say that your father's experiences really shaped the way you approach DoNotPay and entrepreneurialism?
Definitely. It's made me fearless, and it's also taught me something else, which is there is a lot of bad stuff that goes on in the world. In Silicon Valley, in California, I think we can be in this bubble of the world is so great, everything is so great, but it's taught me that there are some really, really bad people out there. Yeah,
fair enough. And you followed in your father's footsteps, and you went to Stanford, and as you said before, ended up with a lot of parking tickets and ultimately a business idea. But then you accepted a Peter Thiel fellowship to drop out of Stanford and build DoNotPay. I think it's one of the coolest fellowships that's out there.
Yeah.
But I'd love to talk a little bit more about that process, really. What made you decide to take that Teal Fellowship as a way to build the company?
I was at Stanford for 3 years at the point that I took the Teal Fellowship, and I'd met everyone there, so I got the benefit of meeting the people. I already know how to code, and so it wasn't really the classes, it was more the people. And the same is true for the fellowship. I've met some of my closest friends. And the problem with these colleges is that everyone wants to work at Facebook or Google or McKinsey, and so I wanted a network of people who are also building companies like me.
What were the benefits, I guess, of building in a fellowship format?
I guess having 20 other people who have the same challenges as you. So there are very few people who might have like fundraising challenges or PR challenges or whatever, because most people work for companies at a young age. But just having a network where you can talk about your problems, it's more the therapy than any specific tactical advice.
Yeah, I get that. And it's so challenging, I guess, for entrepreneurs because there are so few people that you can relate to about some of these problems, whether it's fundraising or whatever else, leading a team. But I still wonder, like, was it scary to walk away from Stanford, or was it almost like you in a line of tradition to like, oh, I'm going to leave Stanford to go and build my startup, the classic Silicon Valley?
It was very scary, but ultimately I was like 3 credits away, and so I could always do it if I wanted.
Yeah, that makes sense. So no regrets?
No regrets. I'm
Good.
living my best life.
Good. Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about what it was like working with Peter Thiel? Like how was he involved in the fellowship?
So we would have these like retreats, and he would speak to us and mentor us.
Nice.
And there's plenty of mentors beyond Peter Thiel as well.
Just now we talked about the problems that entrepreneurs face and how they're very rare, I guess, or they're very incomparable to a lot of other career paths. Can you talk to me about like any of the anxieties or tensions really that come with being an entrepreneur, or that you face being a young entrepreneur?
The biggest thing for me was coming up with a business model. So DoNotPay had a great product, getting people out of their tickets, but it wasn't clear we could make money from it because it was a free product. And so we spent years trying to build out the business model to ultimately sustain itself.
We talk about the team that you built and that they're all pretty young, but generally, in startup land, you end up building these teams, and oftentimes they're really young founders, and you bring in people with more experience than yourselves, right? You hire out your weaknesses. Do you ever have those like strange moments of bringing in people or bringing in advisors or whatever else that are older than you, but ultimately respond to you or work for you?
Yeah, it's incredible. You can do things in life that you didn't even know existed by bringing in people. So I guess involving a law firm in DoNotPay, Wilson Sonsini, opened up a world of possibilities.
And so you have a lot of lawyers you work with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, like other professionals with a lot of experience as well, but what kind of tensions has that caused working with, I guess, like, I don't know, those older professionals or recruiting top talent to your team?
I think the biggest tension is that DoNotPay's mission is to replace lawyers, and so working with people we're trying to replace, but ultimately we're only replacing the most greedy ones, like the ones you see on billboards, and so the ones that help us don't seem to mind that much.
Are those the greedy ones, the ones that are on billboards, talking about injury law and whatever
Definitely.
else? Okay.
I think that there's no reason you have to pay 50% of the cost of the settlement if you have a personal injury problem, for example.
Are you working on anything new on the horizon you want to debut here? You want to talk about any next plays we should be hearing about soon?
I think the biggest thing we're doing at DoNotPay is a big focus on privacy. We have like 20 different privacy products that basically can make you invisible online. So that's all I'll say, but I'm very excited about that.
Very cool. What about with crypto or NFTs? Is there any involvement with DoNotPay in any of that, or on the blockchain?
The biggest thing we do with crypto is helping you getting funds unfrozen. These big crypto exchanges, they sometimes act like the banks they're trying to replace, and they're freezing funds and all of this stuff. And I understand why they do it, but the consumer needs to fight back and get their rights.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting to hear about all these people who have like amassed these massive wallets, or at the time they were small. 100 Bitcoin was nothing, but now they have them and they're in these wallets and they can't even access them. Do you think there's any potential for DoNotPay to be able to come in and solve those problems, or are they gone?
I think if that were the case, we would be like a $50 billion company at this point. I don't know how they get up every day knowing that there's like $500 million locked up that they
Yeah.
can't have access to.
Yeah, it's kind of insanity.
Yeah.
So there's tons of these programs out there that'll come and, you know, they're like pitch competitions, right? You go to them and you'll walk away with a check for maybe $50,000 at the highest. Sometimes it's like $15,000. And they tell people that that's what you need to get started, right? To go and build an MVP, get your company up and running, and prove out that there's a model there. But you know, both of us being from Silicon Valley and being there, we know that it takes way more capital, it takes way more connections, whatever else to build a company. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the fundraising that went on for DoNotPay and really building you know, a company and business model?
I didn't know I wanted to make it a business, but some VCs on Sand Hill Road actually used DoNotPay to get out of their parking tickets, and they ultimately convinced me to make it into a company. And so I began to pitch all these VCs, and most of them turned me away. They said, this is just a parking ticket bot. How can this ever be big? And although I was pitching the vision of like a robot lawyer in many areas, few got it. But one VC, Andreessen Horowitz, I was fortunate that they invested $1 million to kind of get it off the ground.
But there's also this, you know, stigma behind VCs, right?
Yeah.
That they're like money hungry, and they, you know, the second you sign with a VC, yes, you get a big check, but now you're also just continuously concerned about the bottom line, rather than innovating and trying to make an amazing product and whatever else, which is really important in the early days of a startup. What was your experience in working with them?
I think that the best VCs take the long-term view, which is that you need the best product to win. And so you look at all these social companies right now, like Clubhouse, they don't have much revenue, but they have a great product, and the VCs take the long-term view towards that. So I'm lucky that they focus on that. The bad VCs, though, they want to make money in the short term.
And so would that be the advice, I guess, to go and find a VC that understands where the founder or the CEO is trying to take the company long-term and trying to have them buy into that vision with them?
Definitely. I think being aligned with the investors is very important. And some people just want to make a quick buck, and I would stay away from those people.
Very cool. And Andreessen Horowitz, have you stayed with them? Is that who you continue to raise from, or are you now raising from other VCs and scaling different ways?
We have a whole list of great VCs, but we're lucky A16Z keep investing.
And then can you talk to me a little bit about the business model now? Like, is it a subscription-based, or is it, how do you monetize DoNotPay?
Yeah, so it's a subscription base. It costs $3 a month, and you get access to all of our products, all you can eat Netflix style.
That's amazing.
And the idea of a robot lawyer seems obvious. We have apps to do everything from get cars or get hotel rooms. But the reason DoNotPay hasn't worked in the past with prior companies and people trying it is that the average person only gets a parking ticket once a year. And so you can't build a business around that. So our insight at DoNotPay was, if we expand to lots of these areas, there are enough areas to make it a subscription, and that's what we've successfully done.
Very interesting. There's a lot of, I guess, talk in startup world about the importance of focus when building a company, right? And like trying to really win one market before trying to branch out and do another. But you've literally done that, right? You've created this suite of products to solve all of these various problems. Do you feel like it was really important for you to first tackle the parking tickets and then go and build this suite? Or, again, because it was necessary for the business model, did you think that was more important to build the suite?
It goes against all the traditional early stage advice, as you mentioned, but I think it's really important, at least for us specifically, to go horizontal. I like to think of DoNotPay as a compound startup that does this. The secret is, and I'm not sure I should reveal this, but on the back end, the infrastructure is the same to solve all of these problems.
Oh, interesting.
But on the front end, to the consumer, it looks very different. So I think if you have that unique dynamic, it's okay to go in different areas. And I guess a good example would be Thumbtack.
Yeah.
They have this marketplace. You can get a cleaner or a plumber, but the services look very different, but the infrastructure looks the same, and we're just doing that for consumer rights.
What about from a marketing standpoint? How are you bringing people in? I mean, to me, it seems like a very clear sell, right?
Yeah.
Everyone wants to optimize their life. I want to stop getting robocallers, spam email, whatever it is. Can you tell me about the marketing?
We get people when they're most angry at the point that they need help. And the way we do that is we publish about 1,000 articles a month on our website. And they get ranked for free on Google. So if you search Sue United, we're the #1 result, and then people learn about DoNotPay and how to fight for their rights and Sue United.
So you publish 1,000 articles a month. I'm curious, how do you do that? Like, do you have a ton of writers sitting on the back end just pumping out content?
Yeah, so we have a core team of 12 engineers, but we also have a team of 40 writers based worldwide that pump out and research high quality legal content.
Wow.
I like to joke we're a media company with a software backend to monetize.
That's insane. I love it though. And search is definitely one of the most underrated forms of marketing, I think. Because especially for you, right, that's a very critical niche. That's how most people solve their problems, right? They go on Google and they search, how do I do this? How do I sue someone? How do I get rid of this parking ticket?
Exactly.
And traditionally it'd just be lawyers or something else that would pop up with ads. But
yeah.
It's a great model. I like that.
And Google AI is very good. They want to rank the best content. So DoNotPay we invest maybe over $100 per article.
Wow.
And so we're trying to get the best content because the AI knows and it can't be cheated.
What about expanding DoNotPay, right? So like, what is long-term growth? Is it just continually building more products specifically geared toward the US market, or do you plan to go international at some point and try to fight bureaucracy in other countries? Because I know, right, in a lot of other countries, like in Iran, for example, it's impossible to fight the government and fight bureaucracy. And no matter how great the lawyer is, when the government's failing, there's only so much you can do.
Perhaps in Iran it wouldn't work so well, but there are many other countries in the world where there is rule of law, and DoNotPay would work perfectly there. So Europe, UK, Australia, Canada, we're looking at those places, but the US is so backwards that we have a lot of work to do here first.
Really, there is that much more to do? Like in the US, you have a continual vision for years to come of more products to build?
Yeah, and so if I look at the next few years, we want to build maybe 1,000 products in our subscription suite. We're at 200 now. But there's a broader vision, which is we want to create a consumer union. I think that there's power in numbers. And once we have 1 million people using DoNotPay, we can actually go to these big companies and say, we have 1 million of your customers, you better start treating them better, or we're going to switch them to your competitor, for example.
How many users do you have now?
So we have over 200,000 paying subscribers.
Very nice. And it's growing? And it's mostly from search it's growing, right?
Yeah, 91% of our new users come from search.
Wow. And what's the other 9%?
Word of mouth, people telling their friends.
Wow, that's very cool. And
NextPlay.
Yes. Do you get a lot of backlash though from any of these like lawyers or any government systems being like, it's not fair to automate these things?
So interestingly, when we launched it here in LA, NPR asked the head of the Los Angeles Parking Ticket Bureau what he thought of DoNotPay. And he said, we actually like it because people write such rubbish in their parking ticket appeals, at least when it comes from someone like DoNotPay. It's well written and standardized. And that's better spin than even I could have come up with.
That's pretty great. Do you think that DoNotPay, I mean, right now it's geared towards consumers, right? It's B2C. Is there a B2B play for you guys in the future?
I think it's hard to focus on both at the same time. I don't want to rule it out, but our mission is fighting for the little guy.
Yeah. And how do you pay it forward? How do you give back? I mean, I know that this is just in the concept alone and the business model alone, you're literally making just legal accessible for people that normally couldn't afford it. But is there anything else you all do?
97% of my time is spent on DoNotPay, but the remaining 3%, I do some investing to help people who are maybe like 4 years earlier than me to avoid the mistakes I made.
That's amazing. And you created a fund to do this, right?
Yeah.
How's that been going?
It's been great. I've done 37 investments so far.
Wow.
Lots of young founders who are just dropping out or just leaving their jobs to take that first step.
Yeah. Would you ever do that? I mean, so you've created a fund, but would you ever create a fellowship like Peter created, or to literally incentivize people to drop out and go and build their startups and pursue their passions?
I think the Teal Fellowship does a great job of that already, so there's no more work in that area needed.
No more work. And what about with your investing? What do you like to focus on? Are you specifically focused on tech, purpose-driven tech? What's your passion for investing?
The opposite of DoNotPay. So I like to focus on deep tech and enterprise. And those have been my most successful investments so far. So I like to diversify a bit.
Okay. Can you tell us about any of the startups that you're working with?
Yeah, so there's this one company I invested in called Luminous Computing, and they make chips that are like 100 times better. And of course, it takes a long time to build these chips.
Right.
But I invested in the first round, and they've now raised over 100 million from Bill Gates and others who probably know some stuff about computer chips.
Yeah. Let's talk about the path to building a successful company.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about like a moment that was really challenging for you, or something that you were worried you wouldn't be able to overcome? I know that for most founders, there's so many of those moments where, it's a question in your mind of, am I going to be able to do this? Is this going to make it? Do you have any of those moments?
I think there was a time for about 6 months when I was starting DoNotPay when it was just me. And it was the most stressful time of my life because I'm a reasonable engineer, but there were problems that I couldn't solve. And so DoNotPay for like days on end would go down, and I would have a final as well because I was studying at Stanford. And it was just the biggest nightmare you could ever imagine. And I didn't really know how to hire people back then. I had just closed the money, and it took me a while to find a few engineers who could join.
And what has been your strategy to finding these engineers? Because I mean, everyone talks about how challenging recruiting is to find really qualified people, and specifically people that are interested in what you're building and can bring that much value. And then in a startup world, to do it without paying an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
So how do you find people? What's your secret to recruiting?
Our secret is we find people working at really boring companies. So a generic example is like a SaaS company for dentists.
Okay.
And they're just not happy, but inside of them, they have this urge to fight back for consumer rights. And that's how we get them, because of the mission.
What about Stanford students, though, or college students in general? I mean, you talked about how important it was to get that network from Stanford. Has that network really been valuable for you, or has it really come in handy? Have you been able to leverage it for various things?
Definitely. I'd say about a third of the employees that DoNotPay are from Stanford.
Why specifically Stanford? Is it just because you're located in Silicon Valley, or do you think that Stanford really breeds this, this passion for tech and for startups?
I think that engineering is really amazing. That's how I learned to code. When I was 12, I was watching the Stanford YouTube videos, and the classes are even better.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. What about your personal life? I mean, you run this company, and I feel like you have the same workaholic-like energy. I follow you on Twitter. I see the late-night tweets at work. But tell me about your personal life. How do you find that balance? What are things that you love to do outside of work?
I wish there was more balance. I don't get much sleep. I tweet late at night, as you mentioned. I mean, I love to travel, and I love all the travel hacks associated with that, and also love to ski. But aside from that, I'm all in on DoNotPay and maybe some investing.
So have there ever been any moments where a lot of these sites, they have terms of services that don't allow bots or scraping or whatever else. Yeah. Have there ever been moments where these companies have come after you for saying you're violating our terms of service or our privacy policy or whatever else?
Yeah, so DoNotPay is an arms race because we're taking a lot of money, millions from these big companies, and so they try and do everything they can to stop us. Wow. And legally, they can't do that much because there was this Supreme Court ruling that said that all websites are public and scraping is fine. But they technically try and stop us by blocking our IPs, blocking appeals from DoNotPay. And so the good news is we're more motivated than them. So we've come up with a great way to fight back, and which is all of the appeals and cases get sent from the user's device. So when the bots are run, the robots are being run from the user's iPhone or from the user's Chrome browser. And that means that instead of one IP submitting an appeal, it's a million IPs. And they would have to block everyone out to stop DoNotPay.
But they don't come after you specifically saying that you're condoning this or you're organizing this mass attack?
A lot of the shady stuff that these big companies do, they like to operate in the shadows. Okay. So it would be their worst nightmare to open their practices up to the court system, because we would get to go back and say to them, well, you have to expose everything you're doing. And so they like to operate in the shadows by doing these things like blocking rather than explicit legal threats. One specific example is we have this product called the free trial credit card. And what it is it's a credit card that you can use for any free trial, and it's not linked to you. So when the trial expires, you don't get charged. And we had like thousands of people every day signing up for Netflix free trials. And so Netflix said, we're just going to block the entire bank of this card. So whenever someone signs up with this one bank, and it was a small regional bank, they can't get a Netflix free trial. And so what we did is we switched the bank to one of the top 4 banks in the United States. And so now, if Netflix wanted to block one of these big banks, they'd have to block like a quarter of their customers.
What do you mean? How did you switch that? Because the card didn't change, right? The user's card didn't change. So how do you switch their bank?
Well, on the back end, the way we were coming up with these cards, we got a new partnership, and we're 3 levels down, so they don't notice.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I'm curious about like any other social initiatives that exist that DoNotPay is able to help with, right? So in this year, we had a big year of focusing on a lot of issues in this country, systemic racism and whatever else. And you talk about how DoNotPay has the ability to galvanize and unionize a lot of people for good. Are there any examples of that, or any ideas in your mind of where you want to take those features, of the ability to galvanize that many people?
Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of cases of people being attacked on the street, particularly minorities with racism. And there's these great laws, it's called compensation for victims of crime. So whenever you read in the news that some of these big companies are being fined, the money actually goes sometimes to these funds that you can get compensation. And so we can help people who are victims get compensation. And we launched that 2 weeks ago, and that's been going very well.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. I like that. So what about cases of abuse, right? So there's so much power you're able to give the consumers now.
Yeah.
I imagine that there's definitely some bad players out there that are looking at DoNotPay saying, wow, this is exactly what I've been waiting for. This is my chance to go and make a ton of money, getting back at the system.
What we've seen over the years is that the crazies already know how to abuse the system.
Yeah.
If you think about it, if you're one of these crazy people, you're not going to go search something on Google, download an app, subscribe, and then go through all these questions. You already know what to do. And so we've had very few cases, maybe like only a dozen people that we've banned over the past 5 years.
Wow, only a dozen in 5 years? That's pretty great. Pivoting slightly here to social media, I guess. There's been this really interesting dynamic that, or I don't want to call it a dynamic. There's been this really interesting moment in time, I guess, where founders are becoming active on social media for the purpose of building in public. But there's also this, Silicon Valley mindset that is, don't put everything on blast. Don't be a public figure. Just be the technologist. Just be the builder. But you seem to toe that line really well, I think, between being a public figure influencer type and being a founder. What is it that appeals to you about social media and having an audience that you think is really useful? But also, what challenges do you think it brings?
I think that being very private and being in stealth is a very bad move. You see all these secretive people building their companies, but that's not really a good idea, because there are opportunities that I've come across that I would have only gotten by being very public on Twitter.
Yeah.
Media opportunities, people wanting to work at DoNotPay, investors. I think the first investor actually reached out to DoNotPay on Twitter DM. So that's how we got started.
And do you reach out to people yourself on Twitter to go after these opportunities, or do you find that they often just reach out to you? They want to be involved?
I'm very public by posting, but and that generates a lot of interest.
Okay. But what about the negatives? Have you ever had any moments where you were like, I don't think this is the right move, or I shouldn't be posting these things on social media? I mean, specifically in my mind, I'm thinking of like Elon Musk as an example, right? Where like the SEC comes after him for saying, he's secured private funding for the company, he's taking it private, or instances like that where, sometimes you get overzealous in a moment and you go and you share something with the public and you realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, when I was 19, I posted this tweet. It was a DoNotPay launch, and I said, all lawyers will be replaced. And within like an hour, I had like 100 lawyers responding saying, you don't know what you're talking about, and like they were just harassing me. And so I've learned to be diplomatic. I only post positive things on Twitter now, even if they're against lawyers. I'm even positive about the lawyers.
That's
which
interesting.
Is hard for me.
I'm the same way. It was after a couple times of making those mistakes, I realized, okay, I don't want to talk about politics on social media. I don't want to talk about anything negative. I don't want to put that energy out in the world. But then, and I've been enjoying the experience now, but what I've been realizing is that there's this whole world of people now that feel disconnected from you if you don't do those things. If you don't post about, your day-to-day in that way, they feel as though, you're just always positive and you're always great and it's always an amazing day in the world of Milan or Josh Browder.
Yeah.
And so it creates this inability to connect with you or to want to follow because you're not relatable.
I've got a great tip for you.
Yeah,
in
please,
that regard,
tell us.
Which is be negative towards people or institutions that everyone hates. So robocallers in San Francisco. Even the people that live in San Francisco don't like it.
Yeah, that's kind of insane. I mean, I want to. San Francisco used to be great, though,
Yeah.
right? Like when I was growing up, San Francisco was the coolest thing. It was tech meets culture. It was a beautiful city, but then it went downhill, and it's become this place where now it's not young anymore. Young people can't afford to live there, and if they can, it's not the nicest scenario.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we talked about this a little bit, right? Going to Miami or Texas or wherever else. But what do you think it's going to take for San Francisco to bounce back?
I think San Francisco will always be an important legacy city, but it's lost its heyday.
Yeah. And what about the separation between Silicon Valley and San Francisco, right? When you think of Silicon Valley, do you think of San Francisco or do you think of Palo Alto and Mountain View?
A few years ago, San Francisco was nothing. It was like this hippie place north of Silicon Valley, and over the past few years, it's become a lot more important. I think we're seeing that reverse, and now everything is going back to Palo Alto, Los Altos, San Jose, and I love those places. I think they're much better run than San Francisco.
Okay, fair enough. And do you think why do you think they're better run, I guess?
I think it's not a city. Cities in America are hard to manage and very dirty and things like that, and so it's mob rule. Because 99% of the people don't care about tech companies, don't care about innovation. They have much bigger problems to worry about.
I agree. Most people have other problems to worry about. What do you, do you really think that most people don't care about tech?
People love the products, but they hate the people behind it because it's a very small group of people.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. But I think, I think tech is trying to become really open, right? We're trying to be really inclusive. It's trying to grow and really be a pathway for a lot of people because it is, right? Tech has been this amazing door to bring people up. Do you see that more now? Are you seeing that in like the teams that even you're building or your peers are building? Are they more diverse, more inclusive?
Yeah, I think tech is like 100 times net positive for society. We see on the media all these negative stories, but in reality, we can do things today that are like many times better than what we could do a few years ago. And I think that's only going to continue in health and government and all this stuff. And so, yeah, I think having a diverse team is very important.
Does DoNotPay collect a lot of data and use that to be able to create a better experience for users?
We have a lot of data, but we don't have access to it. We keep it locked up with this third party. And the first line of our terms of service is we will never sell your data.
That's amazing. But that data can often be really useful, right? Like, I mean, what do you think of companies like Facebook, I guess, like leveraging data?
I think they have a business model where it's not in the same interest of the consumer. At DoNotPay, we work for our customers. They're literally paying us. But Facebook, they work for advertisers, so the incentives are not aligned entirely. But I think even Facebook is a good product that connects a lot of people.
What about Facebook as a product, right? So now they have Instagram, they have WhatsApp, whatever else.
Yeah.
Where do you see Facebook going?
I think all of these companies are in a race to control our lives. So they're trying to become banks, they're trying to become content companies, just eat up all of our time. I'm not worried about Facebook. I think Facebook is just a social network. I'm worried about Apple. I think we're all going to be under the control of Apple over the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I mean, Apple and Facebook are now going toe-to-toe.
Yeah.
I mean, can you tell me more about why you think Apple is going to be... I mean, you're an Apple user, right?
And an Apple partner with the App Store.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're going to take over?
Well, they control the devices that we all use. And they're very restrictive with their App Store. There's this big lawsuit going on with the Fortnite Epic Games. Right. And soon they're going to be controlling our eyes with the Apple glasses, and they're going to build a car and all of this stuff, and they're just going to lock everyone in. I use the Apple Card now, so my bank is with Apple. Everything is switching over to them.
Apple is really popular in the US, but around the world, Android is pretty dominant. You don't have the same fears from Google?
I think both of them.
Alphabet?
Both of them, but Google is slightly more open and friendly, at least in the short term. I think big corporations are evil in the long term, but Apple is evil in the short term as well.
Yeah. Do you have, are there certain mentors, or I guess not mentors, but like idols that you looked up to, like from these major companies or these success stories that, you know, now in reflection, they were really pivotal to shaping you to become who you are today?
I think not necessarily an entrepreneur, but Ralph Nader is my biggest idol.
Okay.
But then from the tech world, Jeff Bezos. So,
Okay.
and the reason it's Jeff Bezos is because he's very customer centric. He actually believes in consumer rights.
Okay,
Amazon
very cool.
has a great return policy. So if I could combine Ralph Nader and Jeff Bezos, that would be my idol.
Okay. So one of the main purposes of this show is to really highlight entrepreneurs doing great things for the world for the purpose of creating, you know, a world of people who aspire to be entrepreneurs and aspire to build great things for the world. But some of these key people we look at, right, like the Jeff Bezoses, the Bill Gateses, the Elon Musks, they're really, you know, demonized. They're looked at as being these terrible people.
Yeah.
Is that just the general sentiment when you know, being in tech because it's just so much power, so much data? Or, you know, do you have a different view on it? Because you say that Bezos is like, you know, one of your idols or your mentors, I guess. So I'm curious, like how do you reconcile those two things?
I think one has to separate the individual to the company. Everyone is flawed, so you read all these personal stories and people get anxious about them. But I just look at the impact, and it's amazing. You can press a button and then in 10 minutes, something is on its way from like Instacart.
I agree. It's like one of the greatest moments in history, I think, where you can do that. Literally anything you could want is available in like, you know, next day shipping.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. What about your upbringing? So you grew up in England, right?
That's right, in a suburb of London.
And then you made it to Silicon Valley. Tell me about that. Like I get how you came here and why you came to Silicon Valley, but do you still have a love for London? Do you still have a lot of friends there and a passion to be there?
My friends and family are there, so I love England as a country, but I think it's very backwards. The most successful company in England is a delivery company. It's like the Uber Eats of the UK, called Deliveroo, and it's worth maybe $5 billion. The most successful private company in the US is Stripe, which is worth $150 billion and counting. So I think that just gives you an idea of how much more ambitious people are in America, and that's why I love it here.
Interesting. Is it more ambition, or do you think it's more access, or it's just... Because I've seen the same sentiment, right? In a lot of countries in Europe and even in the Middle East, it's always, we're the dominant force in this country, but they can't make it out of it. They can't, you know, it's not the dominant force in the world.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think, well, the Eastern world is like a different system, closed off. But certainly in the West, like in England, we always used everything that was made in Silicon Valley, but it would take like 6 months to get there. We could really use some of the companies in England that are being made in Silicon Valley. I think they create so much value.
You know, you mentioned that your goal is to have 1 million users.
Yeah.
First, I'm curious, like, is there, based on your trajectory now,
100 million.
Oh, 100 million users.
Did I say 1 million?
You said 1 million,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, no.
Okay, so the
Millions
goal is to have
of people.
Okay, 100 million, so millions of people.
Yeah.
What's the trajectory for that? Like, when do you expect to be there?
I think DoNotPay is a universal need. Today, we see homeless people using our product because, unfortunately, they get parking tickets using in their cars.
Wow.
But separately, we have rich VCs using our product because they want to cancel their $5,000 a year Equinox subscriptions.
Yeah.
And so everyone gets ripped off, and DoNotPay can fight back for everyone.
And so with hundreds of millions of users, I mean, there's so much responsibility in that, right? And so much power that you can do with that. Is the goal to continually just serve these users? Or, you know, like we talked about earlier, the unionization. Is there a bigger plan of what you can do with 100 million users at your access?
DoNotPay can become a union that fights back on behalf of people. And there's real power in numbers. I think that the legal system, for all its flaws, one of the benefits is it's created a culture of fear. No company wants people to slip in their restaurant because then there's this big lawsuit. And if we apply that same fear to ripping people off, these big companies will start treating people better, make it easier to cancel subscriptions, and stop charging all these random fees.
So the goal of DoNotPay, I guess, is to end up creating a system of accountability, right?
Exactly,
when it's so accessible to be able to hold people accountable, the idea is that they will be better and do better, right?
Yeah, they'll look over their shoulder and think twice before charging $50 billion in bank fees every year, which is what gets charged today.
Is there anything new on the horizon you want to debut here? Any next plays we should be hearing about or talking about?
I think the biggest thing is our focus on privacy. We're launching about 20 products to make yourself invisible online and to also delete all your data from these big companies.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here again. Thank you for all the work you're doing, making legal accessible and making it so easy to eliminate, injustices in bureaucratic systems.
Thank you for having me and for the delicious milkshake.
Of course, it was a pleasure. Till next time, thank you.